James Clear was hit in the face with an errant baseball bat on accident when he was a sophomore in high school. He nearly died and suffered multiple facial bone fractures as well as severe brain injury. Clear went from being a young man highly gifted in baseball with a promising future to a young man that had to learn basic functions all over again. To say that his life changed is an understatement, but that change allowed him to focus on the small details of life that make up the basis for his book Atomic Habits. Dedicating himself to making small changes and creating routines allowed James to feel a sense of control in a life that seemed to be missing since that terrible accident. By keeping track of his habits and making it a point to add habits that were beneficial, he went from a guy who had a traumatic brain injury to earning the highest accolades at college and being the captain of his college baseball team. It was amassing all new accomplishments through habit and routine that led James Clear to want to start publishing his thoughts. Several years ago, he started an e-newsletter that detailed the habits he had instilled in himself and the ones he was currently trying. Within a few years, he had a massive following and was sending out thousands of e-newsletters, and that turned into so much more. His book Atomic Habits details how to create and break habits and the biological and social science behind habit behavior. The surprising power of Atomic Habits is all about making minute changes in your life that add up to major benefits. One term that encompasses exactly what this book is all about is aggregation of marginal gains, which is a term that was coined by Dave Brailsford, who helped lead the British cycling team to multiple victories. Quite simply, it means that the habits in your life, even the very small ones that you perceive as insignificant, actually add up and make big impacts. This also means that if one compounds a bunch of bad habits that seem trivial, they will compound into major setbacks, delays, and negatives. With small gains, the biggest challenge a person faces is reaching the plateau of latent potential, and that is where you have the ability, the potential for change, but you have yet to push past that final moment into making gains. You give up because the gratification isn't quick enough, you're not seeing enough improvement. From the outside, you appear to be an overnight success when you break through the plateau, but behind the scenes, you were accruing those marginal gains the entire time. In order to be successful, you need to forget about goals and focus on systems. There are 4 problems with goals. Winners and losers have the same goals. Achieving a goal is only momentary change, not lasting happiness. Goals restrict your happiness because you are too focused on the end game rather than the process. Goals are at odds with long-term progress because they are short bursts of inspiration rather than continual growth. Your thoughts and habits shape your identity, and there are 3 layers to changing habits. You can change your outcomes, change your process, and then you can change your identity. That is working from the outside in. In order to actually make lasting changes to your habits and habit-forming behavior, you have to flip it and work from the inside out, starting with deciding what you want your identity to be. Then what systems you need to put in place to continually build that identity, and finally decide what outcomes you would like because of the identity that you have chosen. Automaticity, when you complete an action without conscious thought about doing it. Habits, nearly all of our habits, are completely automatic. If all of our actions are automatic, how do we go about breaking bad habits and creating good habits? A habit scorecard. Basically, you take and think through your day or keep a notebook with you and write down every single thing that you consistently do day in and day out. If you wake up, get coffee, brush teeth, take shower, let the dog out, make breakfast, let the dog in, play on social media for 30 minutes, then that's what you list. Then you go through and you put a plus, minus, or equal sign next to each item. You are not looking to make immediate changes. You are simply evaluating what you do during your day and whether it is a benefit or a detriment to your identity. After you have identified your habits, it's time to create the habits you wish to improve your identity. To be successful, you have to be intentional. Pick a behavior, a time, and a location. You must perform the behavior at that time and that location, and you need to do it repeatedly, so think about the likelihood of the time and locations being spaces in your life you can commit to the new behavior. If you are trying to read 20 minutes a day at lunch but you eat your lunch while commuting to a client's house, that's not a good time to read. Habit stacking can help you pick a beneficial time and location to insert a new habit. Habit stacking is where you take a new habit and you add it to an existing routine. Example, I am going to let the dog out, make breakfast, let the dog in, read for 20 minutes, then go on social media. You put the 20 minutes of reading into the morning routine. Ways to form good habits are and create effective systems, choosing your identity and then repeating the thoughts, behaviors, and actions that match that identity. The feedback loop of repetition is that your habits shape your identity and your identity shapes your habits. If you repeat the behaviors and actions of your desired identity until they become habits, it will reinforce more desirable habits. A brief example would be weight loss. If your desired outcome is weight loss, then you probably think your system should be exercise and your identity should be that you're a skinny person that's working from the outside inwards. But what should happen is you start from the identity of being a healthy person, then you ask yourself, what would a healthy person do? What would a healthy person eat? And you construct systems that support eating a healthier diet and getting exercise on a regular lifestyle basis, and then your outcome happens on its own. The environment plays a much larger role in which habits you perform, more so even than motivation. You can have all the motivation in the world to lift weights, but if you're at home and don't have any weights available, then you are not going to lift weights. Your environment needs to be specifically geared to foster the habits that you want to create to reinforce the identity that you want to have. Think about the relationships you have with the objects in your environment. When you sit down at your desk in your office, odds are you aren't thinking of making a bowl of popcorn and turning on a football game like you would when you sit on the couch in your living room. A good way to think about your environment is to separate each space for its function. One space, one use. Designate areas for different purposes, and then those spaces will trigger your brain to work better with those habits. Make your environment such that it is easy to do good habits and harder to do the bad. When we come across things that spark our interest and get our attention, it is because that item, person, place is attractive to us. There are a variety of factors that influence why we find things attractive and crave them, and we can use that knowledge to increase our craving for better habits that help us achieve our chosen identity. Making objects more attractive inflates our interest. Studies have shown that showing someone larger versions of items they like, or multiples of that item, drastically inflates interest. This is because it spikes our dopamine levels, and the higher the dopamine spike, the faster that habit is formed because the craving is that much more intense. Remember, cue, craving, response, reward. Craving is the desire to get something that motivates us to create systems. The dopamine feedback loop is crucial to forming habits. We need to make our rewards entertaining because it's the anticipation that creates the craving, dopamine spike, not the attainment. In other words, we see something attractive and we want it because dopamine floods our brain, and then we work to get it. Once we have the reward, the dopamine levels crash and we go back to square one. So the actual attainment of the reward isn't as important in craving the reward. When things in life aren't satisfying, we don't do them, we don't attend them, we don't respond to them. A habit is the same concept. If the reward for your habit isn't satisfying, then you are not going to maintain performing that particular habit. If you want to stop a habit, then you have to make the reward unsatisfying. To begin with, how do we get a habit to be satisfying? Cardinal rule: you have to make the habit instantly appealing. Something about the habit has to satisfy at least one of the 5 senses, and preferably more. James Clear uses the example of people in Pakistan falling in love with washing their hands due to them loving the convenience, the scent of the soap, and the quick, rich lather. 2 of the 3 appealing, satisfying factors were sensory related. Your senses want to be stimulated in a positive manner, and if you do so, then you are going to want to repeat the satisfactory experience. Visual methods are immediately satisfying. Clear highlights a guy putting around 150 paper clips in a jar, and he uses them to mark each phone call he makes to drum up business. By the end of the day, all the paper clips are moved from one jar to the other. It motivates that person to keep plugging along because he can actually see how much he has accomplished. This system can be applied to literally anything. If you want to work out, put 10 marbles in a jar, and each marble represents a set of 10 reps you are going to do for each exercise. By the time you get done, you've done 100 reps, and you'll see yourself succeeding. Bribe yourself. Pay yourself for making good choices, and then use that money to do something worthwhile. The only caveat is that if you are working on saving rather than spending, you need to invert this advice. Instead of buying something in the future, make a financial investment in your future by taking the money you have saved and adding it to your 401 Kelvin. You've discovered the cue, you've figured out the craving. Now it's time to make it easy to get that reward, and that is creating a system. There is a difference between motion and action. When you are in motion, you are planning and scheming and setting things up to build a way to your reward, but when you are acting, you are actively engaged in getting your reward. You are doing something at the moment that is actually going to make an impact, difference. Motion is not really doing, and it is almost a covert form of procrastination. You feel like you are doing something. You're outlining your game plan, you're making lists, you're organizing your space to get it just the way you want to be able to sit down and write your book. But you're not actually writing your book. Knowing this important biological information, we can use it to our advantage and temptation bundle. Temptation bundling is like a carrot and a stick. You set up a habit you have to do with one that you enjoy doing. James Clear used the example of a guy who needed to exercise but wanted to binge watch Netflix, so he rigged his stationary bike to power his computer. The only way he could watch Netflix was if he was riding his stationary bike above a certain speed. Intense but effective. You can do these other ways too. Say you agreed to help out with chores around the house and doing the dishes, and then you'll reward yourself with listening to your favorite podcast. Flip it, and while you're doing the dishes listening to your favorite podcast, then you'll actually look forward to doing the dishes because you'll get your reward. The role that friends and family play in your habits and how attractive they are is significant. Your culture's habits are some of the most attractive habits for you. What they see as important and valuable, you initially will too, and your identity becomes that of your people. This is also a part of social norms and PAX behavior mentality. We want to belong, we want to be part of the group, and so our identities and habits get tied up in what we need to be and do in order to belong. Sometimes it's a good thing. When you have a house and community full of people who are kind and generous and ambitious and supportive, you are sure to go far in your own growth. But if you are held back by your cultures, family, community beliefs, and behaviors, then it is very hard to break down the habits that hold you to those ideas and create new ones. We pick up the habits of people around us, so you have to aspire to be around the people that support the identity you want and the people that can influence you to have beneficial habits. But conversely, you can change your habits by removing yourself from groups that make you go against your identity. Joining groups that are attractive to you will fill you with good change. Habits become habits due to repetition. How many reps must you perform before it becomes automatic? That depends on you and your brain. If you wanted to learn to dive and you went to the pool once a year, you might learn to dive in a few years. But if you went once a month, your odds would improve, and once a week would be better, and several times a week, and you'd be a diver in no time. The more you do a behavior or action that you are trying to adopt, the faster it forms pathways through your brain that make it automatic. One way to start that necessary repetition is James Clear's 2-minute rule, and basically, it's doing whatever you want your habit to be for 2 minutes, then stop and walk away. Do you want to be a prolific reader? Then read for 2 minutes, then put the book away and do something else. This can be applied to anything. The trick is that once you start committing to just 2 minutes, it won't seem such a hardship to do it at all, and then adding time to the 2 minutes will come naturally. Again, this time that habit stacking and temptation bundling can really help. To stack the habit for going to the gym. Let's say you find a gym on your way home from work, so then it's when I get off work I will go to the gym for 2 minutes, and then to make that worthwhile, layer in a temptation bundle where I'll download the new rock CD to listen to while I lift weights for 2 minutes. Now you are making a new habit layered in habits that already exist, and you're making it appealing by adding a reward besides just fulfilling the commitment. If you are satisfied, you repeat. If you are dissatisfied, you avoid. But what about the long term? See, there is a discord between gratification rates. When you are performing a habit that is good for you, usually the payoff is in the future and there isn't very much instant gratification. Conversely, when you are performing a negative habit, the reward is almost instant, but the consequence is in the future. Prime examples: getting in shape takes time. You go to the gym every day and work out for an hour, but at the end of the hour you haven't lost weight. It takes time, and in a month you may have lost a few pounds, and by the following year, you're down several sizes. That's a delayed reward, but it's worth it if you can make the practice of it satisfying. Now the negative habit example is easy: smoking. You feel stressed, you grab a smoke, and you instantly feel better and less stressed out. Perhaps 20 or 30 years later you develop lung or oral cancer, delayed consequence. This mismatch of rewards makes it a lot easier to continue negative habits and put off positive ones. Don't lose faith. There are techniques to make positive habits more satisfying quicker and negative habits more disgusting faster. After you've attained many good habits and you've done them for a while, you're going to want to take note of the Goldilocks rule, and that is that it cannot be too easy nor too hard. It needs to be just right. What is just right? Well, just right means that it has to be within your manageability threshold. A manageability threshold is the place where you feel challenged and intrigued but not overwhelmed and likely to give up. Even more impactful to your success level than manageability threshold is your ability to overcome boredom. Of all the factors that have been discussed in making and maintaining good habits, persevering through boredom is a top contributor to failure. When the habit becomes routine, you actually slightly decrease in your success rate because you stop paying attention to fine details. While there is nothing inherently wrong with that occurring, it does lead to complacency, which leads to boredom, which eventually leads to dismissing the habit. How can you change this? Variety and fine-tuning. Variety really is the spice of life, and reevaluating your habit and adding some incentives for success will go a long way to keeping you engaged. Turn that instant gratification to your advantage. After you finish a solid week's worth of workouts, go buy the expensive workout outfit you have been coveting to make you feel good about how you look when you work out. The same applies to get rid of a bad habit. Every time you don't buy a pack of cigarettes, put that money in a clear glass jar, and when you've accumulated enough for a full body massage, then go and get one. You will see that by not smoking you saved a ton of money and were able to do something that relieves your stress and was a healthy event. Holding yourself accountable for making tough decisions like persevering through boring but necessary habits and dispelling negative ones can be daunting. Clear has a solution for that as well, and it's to have an accountability partner in contract. This person needs to be someone who can actively participate in keeping you on track with your habit change. Set clear parameters, line out what the outcome needs to be, and the consequences for failing to achieve a set outcome. Then have that accountability person hold you accountable for making that change. To form a habit, we have to make it attractive. To break a habit, we have to make it unattractive. Habits come from craving, and cravings come from deep places. Even if it seems superficial at first, whatever you're craving has a deeper meaning: motivation. The motivation could be for basic needs such as food, water, shelter, to find a mate and reproduce, to find companionship and love, win social acceptance, etc. But the craving is motivated by a need. In order to break bad habits, we need to find out what those motivations for that craving are and then find a good habit to fill that need. This is a mind frame change. You have to change the way you think about your need as being a part of the identity you want to cultivate and find a habit that matches it. So if smoking is a habit that you have, but you chose to have a healthy personal identity, then you have to change that habit to one that fits your habit. What's the motivation that led to that craving? You were stressed, you smoked, and nicotine relaxed you, and now you crave the cigarette when you're stressed. Find something else that relieves stress but fits your healthy identity, like running and getting endorphins to flood your body and relieve stress. 2. Another tool that will not only keep your habit engaging but also help you grow as a person is to analyze your habits and then pick an aspect to fine-tune. If your habit, identity, is becoming a healthier cook, then add new recipes to master and new cooking techniques to master your habits and work on perfecting them. Continual analysis and reflection go a long way to increasing habit performance and reducing the amount of boredom you experience when a habit becomes automatic. Finally, to truly create your identity and form habits that support it, you have to stop holding yourself back. Creating an identity takes time and, most importantly, an open mind. You cannot become the person you want to be and keep evolving and adopting beneficial habits if you get prideful about that identity and only stick to your perceived idea of what that type of person would be or do. Then you limit your growth and your opportunities. Once you open your mind and continue to grow, the final thought that you need to change is that success is a goal that has an end mark to achieve. Success is continual growth and change and improvement throughout a lifetime. Success is constantly reevaluating your habits and identity and incorporating new habits where needed while pruning behaviors that are no longer constructive to who you are. There are 4 steps to building a habit, and they all have to happen consistently for the habit to become a part of your routine. You want a positive mental feedback loop so that your brain is happy to do the habit repeatedly. Conversely, if you want to break a habit, you have to create a negative feedback loop. Everything about the habit has to become harder and repugnant so that your brain will want to avoid the activity.